They called him Mop Man, like he was just another shadow on the floor, just another nobody sweeping boot scuffs left by real soldiers. But when the alarms failed and the base plunged into chaos, the man they laughed at took command without saying a word. If you believe true leadership doesn't need a title, like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. Every morning at 0400 sharp, long before the SEAL recruits stumbled into their first sets of burpees, before instructors barked commands, or the mess hall fired up its first burner, Thomas Mack McAllister unlocked the side door to the training facility with a quiet click, pushed in a squeaky mop bucket, and began his silent rounds. No one paid him much mind, just the janitor with a limp, the one who always smelled faintly of floor polish and black coffee. His boots were scuffed, his jumpsuit sun-faded, and his name tag simply read T. McAllister. At 73, he looked like someone who'd wandered in from another era and just never left. New recruits didn't salute him. Some didn't even hold the door. But they did joke. "Watch out, Private. He's probably got mop-based recon intel," one said, earning a chorus of snickers from others. Lieutenant Drew Salvo, one of the more theatrical instructors, made a habit of walking by during inspections just to toss in a jab. "Make sure the mop guy doesn't short-circuit the defib machine again," he quipped one morning. Mac didn't respond. He never did. He just dipped the mop, wrung it tight, and continued polishing the very floor Salvo strutted across, like nothing had been said at all. But there were signs. Quiet ones. Like how the Master Chief always nodded respectfully when he passed Mac in the hallway. Or how the cook, a grizzled man named Ortiz who didn't smile for anyone, always set aside an extra tray in the back labeled Mac, "Do not touch." Still, to the recruits, he was harmless. Old. Out of place. Forgotten. One evening, during equipment inventory, Mac noticed something off in the south wing. A flicker in the fire panel display, a surge of static across the backup radio receiver. He tested the breaker box not once, but twice and frowned. He wrote a note. Neatly, quietly, folded it in half and slid it under the tech officer's door. It read, "Backup systems show instability under high draw. Possible panel relay failure. Recommend diagnostic." No one replied. By the next morning, it was crumpled in the trash. Salvo called it paranoia. That janitor's one bad lightning storm away from a tinfoil hat. He laughed in the break room. Mac didn't seem to notice. But that morning, he spent extra time in the old comms room, running his hand along the edge of a dusty PA panel long thought disconnected. And at exactly 0427 hours, he paused near the emergency generator shed, listening not to sound, but to absence. Because when you've led men into silence before a raid, you learn to hear what isn't there. Mac checked his watch. A storm was building. Not in the sky, but in the wires. It happened just after 2100 hours. The kind of spring night where the humidity clings to your collar and the wind hums with the static of something waiting to go wrong. Most of the recruits were settling in after an exhausting series of night ops drills, soaked, sand-covered, and sore, with their gear stacked carelessly by their bunks and their minds already halfway to the next day's punishment. Lieutenant Salvo stood near the control room window, reviewing perimeter logs while munching on a protein bar, oblivious to the subtle irregularities blinking across the fire monitoring screen. Minor alerts, a delayed sync. Something about an error code on a backup relay. Glitch, he muttered, tossing the wrapper aside. But 200 yards away, in the east corridor just past the old armory, Thomas McAllister was wide awake and already moving. The lights flickered once, then dropped. Full blackout. No warning siren. No recorded alert. Just instant, oppressive darkness. Inside the dormitories, cadets froze. Some shouted. Others laughed, thinking it was a test. But when the door locks disengaged and emergency strobes failed to kick in, panic crept in like smoke. Salvo cursed and banged on the security console, but it was unresponsive, screens blank, radios dead, cameras dark. "This isn't a drill," he barked into the void, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. Outside, the wind surged. And in the pitch black between the northern and eastern wings, an old man with a limp was already unlocking the maintenance panel to a long-forgotten emergency terminal built into the infrastructure decades ago. Back when bases were designed by people who expected to be overrun, not cushioned by software. Mac flicked 3 manual toggles, bypassed the fried breaker, and twisted a rusted key that hadn't been turned in years. Somewhere beneath the barracks, the backup PA line coughed to life. Then came a voice, calm, firm, impossibly familiar. "All personnel, evacuate via Red Path Protocol. Avoid South Wing. This is not a drill. It was the kind of voice that didn't shout, didn't panic. It just told you what to do, and your body obeyed before your brain caught up. Instructors turned. Cadets bolted upright. "Who is that?" someone asked. Lieutenant Salvo stammered. "That can't be." "Is that Mac?" But there was no time to ask. Recruits poured out into the quad, following emergency glow tape that no one remembered installing, because it hadn't been installed by anyone recently. It had been maintained, silently, consistently, by a man no one thought was watching. One recruit, still half-dazed, passed Mac in the hallway and paused. "Sir?" he asked instinctively. Mac didn't respond. He was too busy hauling a carbon filtration kit into the East Barracks where smoke was starting to creep beneath the floor vents. The panel had shorted. A spark. A fuse. If he hadn't noticed the warning 3 days earlier and placed temporary firebreak foam around the floor seals, the entire lower wing could have gone up before they'd even known. Evac complete on Alpha and Bravo. South wing compromised. "I need fire suppression now," Max said into the mic, still calm, still clear. The frequency was low-band analog, one of the only untouched by the power failure. The instructors had no idea where it connected. But the Master Chief knew. He ran for the panel room. When he arrived, he found Mac covered in soot, sleeves rolled, hands wrapped around a transmission handle like it was 1972 again. "Thought you weren't supposed to touch the radios," the Master Chief said, out of breath. Mac gave the faintest shrug. Wasn't anyone else up? That was all. By 2140, power had stabilized, alarms were live, and a temporary control center was active in the training command room. No injuries. No fatalities. No panic. The south wing fire had reached the second ceiling panel, but stopped there, because someone had reinforced the firewall behind the wall tiles. Someone who mopped those same tiles every morning. Someone who had noticed rust in the insulation 2 months ago and patched it himself, quietly, while others laughed in the break room. Salvo entered the room pale and speechless. He looked at Mac, really looked, for the first time. How did you know what to do?" he asked, but the words barely escaped his throat. Mac just handed him a flash drive. "Backups of the perimeter failsafes. Figured you might want them now." Salvo took it with trembling hands. It was labeled in all caps, "TAC redundancy classified." A code he recognized. A code no civilian should know, except maybe one who'd written it. The Master Chief, standing behind him, finally spoke. "You ever wonder why that janitor has full clearance on utility access?" Salvo blinked. "He's not even," he was. The Master Chief cut in. "Long before any of us." The room fell into silence as Mac stepped out, his boots echoing against the tile like war drums in the quiet. The recruits outside had begun to gather again. Not in panic this time, but in wordless awe. Some stood straighter. Some removed their caps. And somewhere in the back row, someone whispered, "Who is he?" The Master Chief just watched the old man disappear into the shadows and muttered one word under his breath, "Commander." By sunrise, the base had shifted. Not just in operations, but in atmosphere. The fire was out, systems were restored, and every dorm hallway buzzed not with drill instructions, but with whispered questions about the janitor who gave orders like a commander and rewired the entire evacuation system without breaking a sweat. Lieutenant Salvo hadn't spoken a word during the debriefing. He just sat stiffly at the end of the long metal table, trying to reconcile the man he'd called Mop Man, with the file now sitting in front of him, stamped with 5 faded letters that changed everything. Former. Naval. Commander. T. McAllister. The Master Chief stood at the head of the room, holding up the folder like it was an artifact dug out of a classified bunker. "This man," he said, his voice clipped, "built this base's original failover protocols. Designed seal-forward operating defenses for over 2 decades. Served in conflicts so black, most of them aren't even named in official records." Salvo looked up slowly, hollow-eyed. "But he's the janitor." The Master Chief stepped forward. He chose to come back. After retirement. After a medal ceremony he never showed up for. After we named a room after him, and he asked us to take the plaque down. Said he didn't need marble, he needed clean hallways. A beat passed. Said the next generation needed more quiet examples and fewer loud heroes. No one in the room moved. Not even the colonel, who'd arrived 2 hours earlier in full dress and hadn't sat down once. "So why'd he mop floors?" one junior officer asked. The Master Chief smiled grimly. "Because they stopped listening when he stood at the front of the row. But when he swept the back of it, he could still protect them." Outside, recruits were lining up for morning formation, But no drill instructor barked the orders. Instead, they stood facing east, watching a man in faded coveralls check the generator lock one last time, tug on it twice like always, and move on same routine, different eyes watching now. One recruit muttered, "That's not a janitor, that's a ghost in plain sight." The nickname stuck. But while most were processing the fire, the blackout, and the almost catastrophe they didn't even realize they'd avoided, Mac was already doing what he always did after crisis, disappearing into the rhythm. He refilled the mop bucket, checked the boiler readout, adjusted the thermostat in Dorm 4 because the cold draft would affect respiration during sleep. No one noticed that he had left the base for precisely 27 minutes. No one noticed what he picked up from the P.O. box in town, a slim manila envelope with no return address, marked simply with the initials of a long-defunct naval contractor. Inside respects, blueprints, updates. He tucked it into his coveralls, right above his heart, and returned before anyone missed him. But things were shifting fast. That afternoon, a deputy from Naval Security arrived with a hard case and a scanner. He asked for Commander T. McAllister. When the front office said no one by that name existed, the deputy just pointed at the mop leaning against the wall. "If that's here," he said, "he is." By evening, word had spread, official now. A memo was posted outside the mess hall stating that all utility access protocols would now route through McAllister custodial authorization. Salvo read it 3 times before balling it up in his fist. "We gave him a fake ID badge with the wrong middle initial," he said under his breath. "We didn't even know his name." The Master Chief just shook his head. "No, you never asked." At 2100, the base loudspeakers buzzed briefly. Then, without announcement or ceremony, the national anthem began to play. Slowly, the quad filled. Recruits stood. Instructors formed ranks. No commands, no prep. Just instinct, respect, and the kind of reverence that didn't need permission. And at the center of it all, a man in a navy blue jumpsuit walked out from between the rows, mop in hand, and stood at the edge of formation, not in front, not above, just beside. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge. But his eyes scanned the horizon like he always did, quiet, steady, prepared. One recruit near the front whispered, "Why didn't anyone tell us who he was?" And a voice from behind answered, "He didn't want to be remembered for what he'd done. He wanted to make sure we did it right after he was gone." That night, Mac didn't go back to his room. He stayed in the generator's shed until nearly 0300, replacing a valve that hadn't failed yet but would have by the end of the month. When the Master Chief stopped by and leaned against the frame, Mac just kept working. "You know they're going to ask you to speak tomorrow." Mac chuckled softly. "Then I better get out of here before sunrise." The Master Chief grinned. "You always did run when they tried to clap." Mac paused, tightening one last bolt. "I don't need the applause," he said. "I need them to listen when the real alarms go off." And with that, he stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and nodded toward the door. "You mind locking up behind me? Got a shift to start in 6 hours." But the Master Chief just watched him walk away. Not toward a medal, not toward a stage, but toward the corridor that still needed sweeping, because some legacies are written in silence, and some commanders don't carry strikes. They carry keys. And when the base woke up the next morning, the floor outside the command wing was already spotless. As if the man they mocked had never left. But this time, they noticed. The next morning, a message circulated quietly through the ranks. Not an official directive, not an email or a posted order. Just a sentence, passed from mouth to mouth, bunk to bunk, report to the quad. Civilian included. Most didn't ask questions. They just showed up. Bios 600 hours, every recruit, every instructor, every member of the staff stood shoulder to shoulder on the wide concrete square, flanked by the 2 training wings and the old armory. A low overcast sky hung above them like a held breath. No one barked commands. No one stood at a podium. They just waited. Mac, as usual, was already there. Mop leaned against the side of the maintenance shed, coveralls slightly damp from his early rounds. He stood near the back, as always, unnoticed, until the Master Chief walked out, eyes locked on him, and nodded once. "Front and center," he said quietly. A rustle swept through the ranks. Mac didn't move at first. He hated this part. But something in the Master Chief's voice made him step forward, one quiet pace at a time, like a man walking into wind. When he stopped in front of the crowd, he didn't stand taller or adjust his sleeves. He just folded his hands behind his back like he always did at dawn. That's when the black SUV pulled in. No sirens. No fanfare. Just one vehicle, one passenger, and one metal case. Out stepped Rear Admiral Lynn Corwin. Clean, sharp, decorated. Her uniform looked like it had never wrinkled. Her stride was precise, her eyes scanning the formation before settling on Mac. She didn't salute. Not yet. She approached him slowly, then turned to face the gathered personnel. "You all know him as Mac," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Custodian, janitor, facility support." She paused. "But what you didn't know, what he never told you, is that he also wrote the last resort tactical doctrine you now study under a new name. He held command over multiple Black-level missions. He built this base's original threat containment protocols from the ground up, and he led more lives out of enemy fire than most of us will ever know." Her voice tightened slightly. "And when he retired, we offered him anything. He asked for nothing, except to come back and clean." A ripple moved through the recruits like a wave through tall grass. Some swallowed hard. Others blinked like they were trying to re-see the man in front of them. Corwin stepped aside. A young officer brought forward a small velvet box. Inside, resting quietly on a field of black, was a silver medal with 2 cross sabers and a ribbon stained darker than standard regulation, the kind reserved for service rendered beyond disclosure. "This is not a reissue," she said. "This is the award he never claimed. The one we've tried to give him for 17 years. She looked at Mac. "Commander Thomas McAllister, with your permission, don't pin it," he said softly, just loud enough for the front row to hear. Corwin blinked. "Sir." Mac turned slightly, scanning the crowd, not with pride, not with ownership, but with a kind of deep, old gravity. "They don't need to see a medal," he said. "They need to remember what happens when someone listens before they speak." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the folded specs he'd received from his post office box 2 days earlier, and held them out. "Instead, update your failover system, and build another analog panel." This time, he turned to the recruits. "Let someone younger carry the key." The Admiral hesitated. Then she nodded. Slowly, respectfully, she closed the box and tucked it under her arm. And then, without waiting for permission, she came to attention and saluted him. A moment passed. Then the Master Chief followed. Then the instructors. Then, one by one, every recruit in formation snapped into salute. Not because of rank, but because the man who stood before them, still wearing coveralls and wet boots, had already done the job. A minute passed. Then another. And then something happened that no one had planned. The base intercom, silent since the fire, crackled once. Then played the national anthem. Not from an announcement, not from a command, but from an old analog tape, fed manually into the control console. The exact tape Mac had repaired a year ago, just in case. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stood there, hats against their chests, as the man they'd ignored stood perfectly still in the middle of it all. Afterward, there was no parade. No speech. Max simply nodded once and walked back toward the storage shed to finish his shift. The medal remained in the Admiral's hand. "What do we do with this?" she asked the Master Chief. He looked toward the mop leaning against the wall. "Put it in the display case next to the generator panel," he said. Not under his name, just with a note, for the one who watched quietly. And that's exactly what they did. From that day forward, every new recruit at the SEAL base was taken to that panel on their first week. Not to hear about war, but to hear a different kind of briefing. One about patience, about attention, about the difference between silence and absence. And on the bottom of the plaque beneath the medal was etched a single phrase, one Mac never said out loud, but lived every day he held that mop. "Be ready before they ask." 3 days later, Thomas McAllister was gone. No notice, no farewell, no request for release. Just a folded jumpsuit on a metal hanger in the janitor's closet, boots perfectly lined beneath, a clean clipboard hanging from a hook, and a single sheet of paper taped to the inside of the locker door. It wasn't a letter, not really, just a short note written in tidy, block handwriting, the kind you learn from years of filling out field reports and casualty logs. It read, "Nothing lasts unless it's built to be handed off. Thanks for letting me mop a little longer. Keep your backups analog. Mac." That was all. No signature. No return address. Just a name that had gone from background noise to living myth in under 72 hours. The Master Chief was the first to find the note. He didn't alert command. He didn't initiate a search. He just stood there, reading it twice, then folded it and slipped it into his chest pocket. When he stepped outside, the sunrise was just beginning to cut through the fog that hung low over the quad. Recruits were already forming ranks for PT, but today something was different. The flag was being raised not by the assigned officer, but by a first-year cadet named Ramirez, the same one Mac had lifted out of smoke during the blackout. No one said a word. They just watched. And when the anthem played, again from that same analog tape system Mac had patched together with wire and tape and quiet foresight, it hit differently. It always would from now on. For the first time, the base didn't just operate with readiness, and operated with memory. A quiet tradition began, never officially listed in any training manual, never formalized in briefing slides. Every Sunday at 0600, one cadet was selected to mop the hallway between the comms room and the generator shed. Not because it needed cleaning, but because it needed remembering. The mop itself, the one Mac had used for over a decade, was retired and mounted behind glass near the utility bay, above the panel where he'd rerouted the comms system the night of the fire. Beneath it was a plain plaque that read, "For the man who never needed the room's attention to command it." Lieutenant Salvo changed, too. He started showing up early. Stopped barking jokes. Took time to walk the halls Mac used to cover and look, not just glance, but really look, at the places he used to overlook. One morning, a recruit asked him what had happened to the janitor. Salvo paused, then said he wasn't a janitor. He was the final test. For what? The recruit asked. Salvo answered softly, for whether we could see past ourselves. The admiral returned once, months later, during a surprise inspection. Everything was clean. Everything ran on time. Every protocol was followed to the letter. But when she toured the facility, she paused outside the janitor's closet, now untouched since the day Mac left. She looked inside, saw the empty hook, the clipboard still ticking with fresh logs written in a new hand, and smiled quietly. "You found a replacement?" she asked. The Master Chief, standing beside her, shook his head. "We just learned how to take over the watch." That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the training barracks, the base lights flickered briefly, just once, like a blank. And across the comms room, a backup relay clicked into place all on its own. No alarm. No emergency. Just a gentle failover test Mac had programmed months ago with a delayed trigger, set to fire only if no one was watching. Someone was always watching now. And maybe that was the point. Not to be seen, but to teach others how to see. That's what made Mac a legend, not the missions he ran, not the medals he refused, but the vacuum he left behind. Not a void, but a shape carved in quiet example, filled slowly by the people he left stronger. There was no statue built in his honor. He would have hated that. But there was one last thing added, years later, when the base was renovated. Beneath the new command center, embedded in the floor near the generator panel, was a small brass square, worn smooth by time. It said only this: "If you're reading this, make sure the damn alarm still works." And just like that, he never left.